I'm here at the Silburn Arboretum in Baltimore City, and we're going to take a tour of trees around this arboretum. It's a beautiful place. It's got a mansion that you can tour, and of course, because I'm a club maker, we're going to take a look at the trees that club makers used before 1900 for golf club heads. Let's take that journey. This is a hawthorn tree identified by its berries here. We're in the fall now, and it's got some thorns here, also known as Crataegus. There are 300 varieties plus of Crataegus or hawthorn tree. Club makers would take a branch point and use that for the head. The main head would come off of the trunk and the neck would come off of the branch. The thing is, you can't use the whole branch because there's a pith in here, and you can't use the whole trunk, again, because of the pith. The pith is the main artery when the tree is first growing, and it's a very weak wood, and also the first few years are very weak. So you'd have to probably have a tree about 6 inches in diameter to make a club head. Yeah, could you get one off of this? Perhaps. From what I understood, they would split it, but I've tried splitting wood on a branch point. I don't know how to do it. You would also know that the grain pattern would be different on a club that comes from the trunk like this. It's oriented differently than when you cut a head out from a board. This is a dogwood tree. I'm sure you've seen these a lot. These trees were used, not commonly, but used somewhat during the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. This is a very young beech tree. You can tell by these serrated leaves. The trunk is very smooth. It's one of the common species where you'll see people put their initials or carve their name. So-and-so loves so-and-so. This is the most common wood that was used in the gutta-percha ball era by far. But this is an American beech. They were using beech from Europe. Some people say that the European beech tends to be a little harder and maybe a little tougher than the American beech. I've been using some beech, and it definitely is a tougher wood, certainly tougher than the maple that I've been using. This is a white oak tree. It has kind of more rounded leaves than the red oak, and occasionally oak was used for making club heads. You'd see some advertisements in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It wasn't a very popular wood. And this is an apple tree, specifically a crabapple tree, Malus family. And this was a common wood in the featherball era. Also, probably the second most common wood throughout most of the gutta-percha era, certainly the early gutta-percha era. And these trees are nice because the wood is just so beautiful. You don't need to stain it. You probably don't want to stain it. But the wood tends to be a little more brittle, and as this tree grows, it self-prunes. So there are a lot of little hidden knots from the branches that have fallen off. And the trunk doesn't typically grow very high, so you don't have much wood to work with. And some of the 19th century texts would say that the smaller, more sour apples were the ones that provided the best wood. And here's a much larger version of a beech tree. And sure enough, the diagnostic sign, all those initials. This is holly, and it can grow quite large. This is a much smaller tree. I doubt you can get a club head out of it, but it's a very white wood. It was used back in the 1700s and 1800s for the heads. It grows very slowly, so it's probably a hard wood because of that. Of course, it wasn't as commonly used as the thorn woods were. So this is rare for the United States to have a hawthorn tree growing this big. So this is something you could theoretically get your club head out of. It's certainly, 8 or 10 inches in diameter. Here's a European beech. Very similar appearing, but the leaves are different, but the trunk looks very similar. The leaves tend to hang down a little bit more. This is boxwood. Very rarely a club was made from boxwood. I'm not sure how, because I've never seen a boxwood grow that big. But apparently a few clubs back in the early 1800s were made with boxwood. It's a great wood for planes in the areas, or hand planes, where the areas wear out. So they would put a piece of boxwood strip in there. They call it boxing a hand plane. And if you can ever make a fort out of a tree, you're probably in a weeping European beech tree. And I'm pretty sure these trees could be used for club making, just like a standard beech tree. Here we are on the outside. Here we have the dominant wood that was used for shaft making in the 1700s, which is ash. This happens to be a white ash. It has these diagonal lines in the bark, which is one of the diagnostic clues of an ash tree. Here you can see the leaves. So the dominant wood, the ash shafts do not have that steely spring that hickory has, so the shafts tended to be thicker, and they had a lot of whip to them, and the flight was probably more unpredictable. And I'm just showing this tree because it's my tree. The most common trees that were probably used in golf club making for many years. This is the persimmon tree. Now, it wasn't used for long-nose era clubs, but it was used as the predominant wood after 1900. They call this the common persimmon. It's from the ebony family, very distinctive bark, almost looks like cobblestones laid in there. Now, there's a maple tree growing in between, and there's another persimmon tree here. Let's see if we can get a look at the leaves. Yeah, a lot of the canopy lower down are maple leaves, but this is a persimmon. These are persimmon leaves. I don't see this tree too much where I live in western Pennsylvania. And of course, these are maple leaves. I've been using hard maple or sugar maple. I don't know which one this one is in particular, but you know, that really wasn't a common wood. They definitely had some maple heads after 1900, but I don't think they used them for long nose era, but it's the only wood that I can find that's somewhat suitable. Unless I can come in here with a chainsaw and chop down all these trees. Just kidding. And one of the last couple trees on my way out of here, I thought I saw a hickory tree, but this is a baby pawpaw tree. But I did happen to see a hickory tree right next to it. The leaves look very similar, as you can see here. And one of the ways to find a hickory tree is to step on one of these hickory nuts. Now, this happens to be, they call it a mocker nut hickory. And of course, hickory was the dominant wood that was used for shafts from the early 1800s all the way up through the end of the wood shaft era in the 1930s or so.